You've quantified that the GNFR spend in the UK is 3.9 billion. That's a significant spend.
When we ask businesses how much they feel like they could save, is that actually they could save around 7%. Hi, I'm Richard Lim, CEO of Retail Economics. I'm joined today by Ian Hall, CEO of CCS McLays. Really excited to discuss the research that we're launching about GNFR. So Ian, let's start with the basics. What is GNFR?
Good question. Goods not for resale. I suppose it covers a multitude of products. It's anything a retailer does not sell to the consumer. It can go from store consumables through to the packaging, through to the hangers, size cubes, that type of product. A medium-sized retailer can have as many as 200-300 different SKUs in that range. Richard, I'm really interested to know your views on the retail sector for 2026 after a turbulent year in 2025.
Yeah, 2025 was pretty difficult, and I think going into 2026, the reality is that it's a pretty tough market. And if I think about some of the main components, then there's still a lot of pressure on households. So some of the biggest concerns on households still remain around the cost of living. And so we've seen inflation fall quite rapidly over the last couple of years. But of course, as we know, falling inflation doesn't mean falling prices. And so there's been a significant uplift in the pricing level, and that's been a real hit on people's spending power. And from a kind of macro perspective, we're also facing into tougher headwinds for GDP. Growth looks pretty anemic. Unemployment is beginning to tick up again. Wage growth is beginning to cool, and so there's some pressure on households. And all of that is set against a backdrop for retailers of rising costs. And a lot of those costs are coming through from the previous budget, and a lot of those additional costs through national living wage and national insurance increases and business rates are really hitting margins. And so retailers are operating against soft economic conditions, soft household spending environment, and then also they face these kind of consistent waves of rising operating costs that are really squeezing margins. And so there's this intense focus on profitability for many businesses, and they're really putting a spotlight on that. And at the same time, businesses are just facing these continuous waves of disruption. Whether that disruption's coming through social media and social commerce that's really changing the way that consumers are discovering and purchasing products. There's pre-loved and the circular economy, and consumers are really buying into that. There's Gen AI, and that's changing the way consumers are discovering and researching products as well. So we've seen this fragmentation across that discovery funnel for many consumers. And that just makes life a bit more challenging for the sector. And what we've also seen is that there's these consistent waves of rising costs for retailers. And a lot of those costs are coming through from announcements from the budget that came through into April 2025. But national insurance, increases in national living wage, some of the support around business rates have been taken away. And what that did is add about £5.6 billion worth of additional operating costs to the sector overall. And it's really put margins under a lot of pressure. Within the research, what we saw is that if we focus on apparel retailers, then there's about a third of them that have really focused on profitability. They are prioritizing profitability, looking at ways of reducing costs, and it's their top priority heading into 2026. Ian, it's clearly a really challenging market out there for the sector. I've touched on some of the pressures. Do you think that reflects some of the conversations you're having with your clients?
Yeah, it does. It reflects most conversations with our clients at this moment. They're all looking to take cost out of their businesses, and GNFR is a sector that when they recognise it as being a cost, that they want to take cost out of it.
Yeah, and I guess at the moment the consumer environment is really challenging, so passing on those costs to their customers is pretty challenging as well. Is that what you're finding with some of your clients?
Without a doubt, I think it's the last thing our retailers want to do is pass the increases on to the consumer. They recognise the challenges that the consumer has got at this moment in time with cost of living increases, and they don't want to do it.
Yeah, and from a consumer perspective, they're battening down the hatches. They might be saving more as well. So we've got that flatter consumer environment, and businesses are also trying to really focus on their costs. It's been a cost of living crisis for many households, and also like an operating cost crisis for many businesses. And so, how are you helping your clients really focus on their costs?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Richard. I think most consumers are nervous about the state of the economy, state of the world. They're saving more, spending less.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult for these retailers to get the customer to spend in their stores.
And Ian, are you working directly with some of your clients to try to help them reduce costs, whether that's in GNFR and other areas?
Yeah, we are. It's been an interesting golden quarter where not only are the retailers focused on their sales, they're also focused on taking their cost out. It doesn't matter whether they've had a very successful 2025 or a less successful 2025, they are looking at their costs.
Yeah. And you work with some great brands as well.
We do.
Got some examples of
We do.
specific brands that you're working with?
2 or 3 spring to mind over the last month. Sea Salt being one of them. I noticed that Paul Hayes, the CEO of Sea Salt, was in the Times yesterday, and he was announcing that they're going to be opening 10 new stores per annum from 2026. They're a 79 store company, so 10 stores is a huge increase for them.
Yeah, great brand as well.
Great brand,
Yeah.
love the brand. They've had a very successful period, particularly in the last quarter. They started going overseas.
Mm-hmm.
We've supported them both in the UK and in the USA. They have 4 stores in the USA now. I think they found the challenges on their GNFR costs, let alone the other costs of expanding globally, to be difficult. So we've helped control the costs for them in the US. They're also moving into the EU, and we will do exactly the same for them in the EU. So there's a robust company with great sales, know where they're going, know where they're opening their new stores in various market towns, and yet they're looking at their costs, and rightly so, and that's probably why they are such a great brand.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things, they've got great brands. They're really developing the online part of the business as well. And going back to some of the challenges, the macro environment in the UK is pretty flat, so internationalisation is such an important strategy for many businesses. They're really driving their growth through internationalisation, and so working with the right partners as they're entering new markets, I guess, is a critical component of that. Critical,
and it's good to see that some of these retailers are recognising that they need global support, and that they don't really want to be dealing with suppliers in different continents.
It's just another headache, because if internationalisation isn't difficult enough in itself, having trusted partners that are already operating in some of these other markets must be a significant issue for them.
It is. Most recently, over the last quarter, we've also been talking to Mountain Warehouse, another successful company, expanding greatly, not only in the number of stores they have, but also in the size of stores that they're operating. So huge growth coming from Mountain Warehouse. We've just followed them into Canada and the US. They were having great problems, extreme costs in both those areas. We have taken over the operation, controlling their GNFR in those 2 areas, taking a huge amount out of their budget. They've also got a challenge in Australia and New Zealand, 2 significant growth areas for them, and they are leading us into those markets. So it's interesting to see how we're being supportive, proactive, and reactive with a client.
Yeah, it's interesting because that partnership then's really, it's beneficial for both parties. You're supporting their growth, they're supporting your growth and kind of expanding into new markets as well. Yeah.
And then back on the domestic scene, we've got Moss Bros, who are revitalised under the evergreen Brian Brick. They're a close association with Crew Clothing, and their rebrand has revitalised them. I see some staggering results from those guys, having only 3 or 4 years ago been right in the doldrums.
It's been a really impressive turnaround for that business.
Really impressive, and yet Brian still comes for cost reductions, and we're happy to oblige.
And if the challenges aren't acute enough for the sector, there's also regulatory pressure as well. So whether that's regulation around tariffs or regulation around trading in different international territories. We've also got kind of domestic regulation as well. How are you supporting some of your clients with some of those regulatory pressures that even add even further costs to the business?
Well, I think we're all getting used to the merry-go-round of different tariffs, different duties every single day, particularly from the US. We are helping our clients where we can. They require an agile supply chain in order to be able to navigate their way around a constantly changing scene. On the domestic side, obviously there's the introduction of the EPR tax. Mm-hmm. I'm yet to speak to a retailer that truly understands what the EPR tax is. It's certainly not a prompt to get retailers to become more sustainable, and it would appear to be more of a stealth charge as opposed to a prompt to bring the retailers into a more of a recycled product.
Right. But again, another challenge just of rising costs throughout the sector.
Rising costs, Richard, you're right. And worse than that, they're not actually sure what that cost will be. And particularly when you look at the QSR sector, those will really be affected by the EPR tax because every single one of their product that is taken home, they have to pay the tax on. And unless you're making the changes and unless you have the right partner advising and innovating products to reduce that taxation, then you will be in for a shock over the next 2 to 3 years.
And the industry is already facing so much pressure in terms of costs, and then we've got additional regulation around plastics through EPR. How are you helping your clients navigate some of those challenges?
Yeah, I think once the retailer acknowledges that EPR is here to stay, they are confused over the cost that comes with EPR. Mm-hmm. So it almost becomes part of the GNFR spend. Mm-hmm. We are attempting to reduce their EPR tax, and we do this by reviewing all the products that they have, all the GNFR products that they have, and we attempt to make those more EPR friendly. Mm-hmm. The taxation is a tax that will continue to grow over the next 2 to 3 years, and some of the fees will be quite significant in year 3 unless they change now.
And a part of that, is it for businesses to almost have a forensic view of all of their packaging, understanding what type of packaging, the composition of their packaging, so they can initially assess just how significant the tax will be? And do you help them with that process as well? Yeah,
we help them with the forensic view. Yet again, it's more cost for the retailer. They're having to beef up their compliance department in order to be able to achieve this, and so are we. But we do help them, and we take them through what they wish to achieve, what we are trying to achieve, and how we can reduce that end tax.
Ian, can you give any examples of clients that you're working with in terms of if they're implementing cost control strategies?
Yeah, for sure. They seem to be very open and public in stating that they do have a cost control strategy in place. I can think of 3 of our clients that have come publicly and said that. For example, Dr. Martens have come out and stated exactly what they are doing and what they want to achieve. In addition to that, we have the revamped Superdry that are doing really well, and also the mighty JD Sports, all of which have stated what they want to achieve. And that's good. That's good for a supplier. We know exactly what we're working towards and exactly what they are working towards. So, Richard, maybe you could tell us a little more about the research you've done for CCS.
Sure.
Do you think it's GNFR is higher up the agenda for the board these days?
The quick answer is yes. And retailers have taken almost like a forensic approach to their cost base, looking at all of the different cost lines and looking at where they can either drive better efficiencies or cut costs with profitability at the top of their minds. As part of the research, we did a couple of things. Firstly, we interviewed over 100 different apparel retailers at a senior level that had decision making around GNFR. And then we also did an audit of 50 of the largest apparel retailers in the UK. We wanted to quantify. GNFR was one of the first things that we wanted to do. What we found is that GNFR costs the industry about £3.9 billion a year. So it's a significant cost.
Very significant cost.
Yeah, it's a significant cost, and then the majority of businesses that we spoke to also expected GNFR costs to rise compared to 2025 as well. We found some really fascinating insights within the research. So if you look at predominantly online businesses, then GNFR costs as a proportion of revenue was higher for those predominantly online businesses compared to predominantly store businesses, irrespective of their size. A lot of that's to do with business model. So greater variable costs associated with packaging or postage or having to deal with returns. And so those variable costs are really associated with volumes. And so as volumes grow, that proportion of costs rose for those types of businesses. There was an interesting dynamic when it came to size. And so we split the market up between small, medium and large. And so those businesses with a turnover of under £250 million, we kind of classified as small, between 250 to 500 medium and 500 million and plus as large. And what we found is that those businesses in the middle, so between 250 and 500 million, saw GNFR costs as a proportion of revenue higher than the other groups. There's a couple of reasons, I think, for that. I think the first one is just cost control. And so if businesses are scaling, they're in that rapid growth in terms of revenue, sometimes cost control isn't necessarily their primary focus. And so actually GNFR costs can rise as a proportion of revenue. But then we also found this inflection point, the inflection point where businesses had reached that scale, they'd reached a maturity, maybe they were investing in operational efficiencies. And so businesses of a size of over 500 million actually saw GNFR costs as a proportion of revenue fall. And so I think that's a evidence of a maturity within the business, better buying power, better cost control, and essentially really putting costs under the spotlight.
You've quantified that the GNFR spend in the UK is 3.9 billion. That's a significant spend.
Yeah.
And understandably, companies will be looking to take cost out of that.
Mm-hmm.
How much do you think? How much cost do you think they can take out of that 3.9 billion?
I think one of the major factors is just making sure that there's systematic reviews of GNFR costs on a regular basis. And so what we found when we asked businesses, how much they feel like they could save, is that actually they could save around 7% of GNFR costs if they had those regular, systematic reviews of costs in a really. We've quantified that, and so that 7% reduction in GNFR costs puts savings of around £276 million a year. And that's £276 million that falls straight to the bottom line. So another way to look at that is that if you're going to generate £276 million into the bottom line, it's about £5 billion worth of additional sales when you consider how thin margins are across the sector. So it's a significant saving. And
it sounds like to me that it's the middle ground where the savings can be made. Absolutely. And we've certainly found that to be true.
It's the middle ground where the savings could be made. And within the research, what we wanted to do is build a bit of a framework around how businesses can look at GNFR as a bit of a hidden cost. And so we built this framework based on 4 pillars. We called it our hidden value index. But there are 4 pillars around transparency, efficiency, innovation, and resilience. The report goes in lots of detail around the framework and how businesses really need to think of this as hidden value and how they can unlock that value if they really focus on GNFR. What are the main strategies that you see your clients adopting when it comes to really focusing on reducing GNFR costs?
I think there isn't a fixed formula for a retailer.
No silver bullet.
No silver bullet. I think every retailer is different, and it's important to recognise that each retailer is different. I try to drum that into the team at CCS, is that what we first need to do with the retailer is listen to what they want to achieve, and then perhaps indicate what we want to achieve with them.
Yeah.
Don't sit there with a set formula and dictate to them that this is what we've done before and this is going to work for you, because it won't.
And so depending on the size of the retailer or the proportion of sales they might have online, the strategies need to adapt to where they sit in the market.
Yeah, correct. I think the bigger the organisation, the more fixed they are in the way that they want to approach the cost reduction in GNFR. Whereas the medium-sized businesses and small businesses and the emerging businesses are slightly more flexible in the way they will review it. Mm-hmm. And I think the guys who are flexible are the retailers that you can achieve the most cost reduction with, because there's not only hard cost savings but also soft cost savings.
Okay. What do you mean by soft cost savings exactly?
It's not all about the price of the product.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the price of the product is significant, but it's sometimes the way that they order the product, sometimes the way that they get the product to store, sometimes the usage and out of stock situation that leads to panic buying. That can all affect the business.
Yeah.
And we see that as a soft cost saving. If you have a controlled manner with a consolidator who has a flexible and agile supply base, then you will not have these soft costs adding up.
Yeah, and there's, of course, retail's very seasonal as a business and having to deal with things like peak. Again, it's like another challenge when you're trying to get your promotions right, get your product right, get it into store. They don't want to have to worry about things like till rolls.
No. Peak is the time when everything breaks down, if you're not with the right partner.
Yeah.
Additionally, supply chains have become more difficult to manage. Product coming from the Far East these days can have a shipping time of anything from 6 to 12 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
As a retailer, do you really want to be concerned where your bags are? Or do you really want to be concerned where your core products are?
Yeah.
We will manage that situation, and through the agility of our supply chain, whether we're using a Far East supplier, a Turkish partner, or even manufacturing in our own supply base in the UK,
mm-hmm.
it's our problem.
And so you help retailers consolidate all of those GNFR products that they need to just remain operational within the business and not have to worry about the supply chain disruptions and currency changes and any bottlenecks and things like that.
It's the consolidation's key.
Mm-hmm.
The consolidation is where it allows the retailer to deal with one supplier and not hundreds of suppliers. Then you can drive the cost out during the contract as well as upfront. So, Richard, your research has proved there's quite a considerable cost saving for retailers. So, why don't they focus on it?
It's a great question, and I think the reality is that there are just so many competing priorities at the moment. Businesses are facing, whether it's changing consumer habits and customer journeys, or the disruption of social commerce, or Gen AI and everything else like that. There are so many different competing priorities, and so it's just a case of making sure that costs and specific to GNFR are the things that kind of resonate through. But I genuinely think that there's probably a lack of leadership buy-in, taking this as a serious cost line that they can really focus on. Sometimes it's resource constraint as well, and so businesses are just really focused on firefighting, and so it's not necessarily at the top of the priority list. But then it's also the market structure for the supply market as well. And so I think there's a combination of different factors that just keep it off of the kind of the top of the priority list in that sense. But businesses can't stand still. And I think this is the thing. And so many businesses are looking at how they need to adapt to consumer behavior, adapt to new technology. How do they continue their digital transformation journey? How do they adapt to omnichannel? How do they adapt to consumers that are using platforms like ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini to discover products? So I think there's a real big opportunity here where we've quantified just how significant the cost saving could be if businesses continued those regular strategic reviews of GNFR. And actually through the research, what we found is that if they can save costs in GNFR, those cost savings typically are going to be deployed in areas around investing in technology. And so businesses can't afford to stay still. And so it's a really important factor that they're focusing on these cost reductions, because it gives them the resource to be able to invest in other areas of the business. You've been in the industry for almost 2 decades now. What do you feel is some of the common traits across the businesses that you work with in terms of their strategies for success?
Yeah, thanks for that, Richard. Yeah, CCS McLays will be 21 in July this year. It's been quite a journey. I think the most striking thing for me is when we're with a client or when we're with a new client, just how many different departments and departmental heads that can be in charge of GNFR products. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's finance, sometimes it's marketing, sometimes it's retail ops, and occasionally it's a purchasing department. But it's amazing how many retailers do not have a purchasing department looking after this sector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Regardless of what title comes with the promoter of this area, I think the most important thing is that they own the product. They own the sector, they own the category, and they help navigate this product through all those departments.
You work with businesses of different sizes as well, different levels of maturity. And so when it comes to accountability around GNFR costs, do you see lots of businesses operating in different ways when it comes to really controlling these costs?
Yeah, the big guys, they have a procurement team solely looking after GNFR costs. It's a very structured way of looking at it, although it tends to be a little bit more inflexible in their approach. What is amazing is that some relatively large, medium-sized businesses still do not have a procurement department looking after GNFR spend.
Okay. And part of that is because it's spread across those different departments, and in some cases it's just growth at all costs for these businesses that are scaling quite quickly, and it just falls between the gaps.
Yeah, the CEO is looking at the sales growth. I know that factor. Whereas potentially they should be looking at making this cost reduction in GNFR.
I love this idea of the retail detail review that you offer prospective clients, where essentially you're conducting kind of an audit of their operations, going into the detail to better understand their business model, where they could really drive cost savings. Can you just shed a bit more light on that?
Well, I'm glad you called it an audit. That's exactly what I used to call it before marketing softened it. The retail detail reviews allows us to understand the business better. With using their forecasts, with listening to their requirements, and with us in control of our supply chain, we can dictate the right levels of stock to allow them to navigate their way through the calendar.
And you're working that closely with businesses, you're understanding their patterns of seasonality, demand forecasting, so they never run out of these essential items during those peak periods of demand.
We're a partner, Richard. Yeah. We go, we listen, we understand their business. We understand when they're opening stores, we understand when they're closing stores, we understand when they're making a promotion within the stores, we understand when they believe that the demand will increase. Mm-hmm. From that, we can get the right stocks at the right time to allow them to function properly. And I think it's important to also recognize that we're taking all of this stock off their balance sheet. It can be quite significant. It can be several £1 million. The CFO's glad to see it go, as you can well imagine. And we're not asking retailers, therefore, to go out, find their own suppliers where they may be having to pay upfront with a new supplier that hasn't been fully audited, that may cause them to be embarrassed further on down the line.
It's a really significant point. The fact that you are taking pressure off of retailers' balance sheets during this period of tougher macroeconomic environment, softer demand in some cases, and they can presumably then focus on the bits of the business that matter the most, focus on growth as well, redeploy some of that cash into different areas of the business to just help support that growth journey for them. Correct.
This is our core business. GNFR is our life, as sad as that may sound. But we can advise them on how to control their GNFR spend. Just don't ask me to advise them on how to increase their sales.
Ian, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed the conversation. I certainly know so much more about GNFR, having conducted the research and had this conversation with you. Please download the report. The report is packed full of lots of more insight, lots of more information. Please click on the link below. Ian, thanks again.
Richard, thanks very much. I enjoyed our time together.